Hey, what's up everybody? Dustin here with Rocky Mountain ATV/MC. Today I'll be showing you how to replace and adjust the throttle cable on a two-stroke dirt bike. Alright, so today I'm going to be showing you how to replace the throttle cable on a 2004 YZ250 two-stroke. Now this bike here has a single cable that operates the throttle. Now there are several other bikes out there that use a dual cable system like a lot of the modern four-strokes. So if you have one of these and need some help with replacing it, see our four-stroke throttle cable replacement video for some help with that. Now after some time and use, your throttle may become a little sticky and doesn't exactly return to the full closed position very smoothly or quickly. Now if this is the case, you either need to maintenance it or replace it. So after having twisted your throttle through all of your adventures, the sheathing inside of the throttle cable, which helps it to operate smoothly, may begin to wear out, making the throttle's operation not so smooth anymore. So when it comes to determining what's going on with your throttle, there's a few things that could be at play. It could be the throttle cable's routing, could be the throttle cable's adjustment, the throttle housing itself, or the throttle tube. Now, you can just replace the cable, and that's generally a good idea because they're relatively inexpensive and easy to do. Now, today we're going to go through and show you how to install the throttle cable, how to maintenance it, adjust it, and what to look for if you're having a not so fun experience when it comes to twisting your throttle. To do this job, you're just going to need a few basic hand tools. You'll need some cable lube, a cable luber, as well as some safety glasses. Now, we offer several different brands of throttle cables. For today's video, we're going to be using the Tusk replacement throttle cable. And as always, before beginning any procedure on your motorcycle, be sure to reference your service manual for those proper procedures and torque specs. All right, so to begin, you're going to want to start by gaining access to the throttle cable. So we're going to pull the seat and then the gas tank. Next, we need to remove the carburetor's slide that the throttle cable is attached to. Now to do that, we need to gain access to these two screws that are on the top of the carburetor. Now to do that, we need to loosen these clamps right here so that we can rotate the carburetor towards us to gain access. Okay, so now that we've got these two screws removed, we can pull this cover up and we can pull out the throttle slide. Now, to get the cable out of the slide, we need to pull the spring up, and then we need to grip the throttle cable as high as we can, right here like so. So we'll take and push the slide up and out, and the cable will come out. At the end of the cable here, there's this larger end, and this will set inside of the center part of the slide here, which it's able to grip. So we'll pull this off. We'll pull our spring, and then we need to remove the threaded part of the cable from the cap. So undo the lock nut and unthread it. All right, so once you get this top part removed from the cable, we can move up to the top side and start working on the throttle housing. All right, so we're up here top side at the throttle housing assembly. Now, to remove the cable, we're going to start by pulling off this rubber cover. And then on the throttle housing itself, we've got an additional rubber casing. So we're going to work this off and peel it back so that we can expose these two screws. Now we'll pull these two screws and remove this cover. So now that we've got the cover removed, we can remove the throttle cable. So to do this, we're going to slide the cable like so, twist the throttle, then we can grab the cable, we can pull it back up, and then we'll work it out of the throttle tube. All right, so once you get the cable worked out of the throttle tube, you're going to want to pull this pulley right here. Now, this pulley has a collar on the inside of it that this rotates around. You want to make sure to not lose this. Next, we can start to remove the throttle cable from the housing. Now to do that, we're going to take a 12mm box open end wrench, and we need to crack free the lock nut. And then we can unthread the throttle cable up here and pull it out. All right, so now that we've got our throttle cable removed from the housing, you can see how this is installed here. We've got a little channel that opens, which allows for us to insert the throttle cable and then thread in this upper part of it. So that's how that comes apart. All right, so now that we've got the throttle cable disconnected from the bike, we can now remove it. So you'll want to pay attention to how the cable is routed so that when you install the new one, you can install it just like the old one. Now you may have some additional cables that secure the throttle cable to the bike, so make sure to get those loose or pull them free. Now also be inspecting your cable routing to make sure that you're not bending around any extreme angles. If it's bending around some really extreme angles, it's going to create some extra resistance when it comes to operating your throttle. Now we can take and thread the throttle cable back through the same routing as it was removed from. Now if you have any question as to how your cable is to be routed, be sure to reference your service manual for that specific information. And again, when routing the cable, make sure that it isn't experiencing any significant or extreme bends. Okay, and it looks like we are there. Now before we get this installed on the rest of the bike, we're gonna lube the cable before we put it into use. So for this, we'll be using the Tusk Cable Luber. Really great tool, easy to use. Now, a couple things you'll notice about it. On one side, you've got a larger opening, and on the other, you've got a very small opening, just enough room for a throttle cable. Now, we're going to set this onto the throttle cable like so. And then we're going to tighten it up. Once you've got that nice and tight, you can take your cable lube and put the nozzle inside the insert. Now when applying some cable lube, just give it a few quick squirts and then work the cable back and forth to work the lube down to the bottom of the cable. Now you'll want to lube this up enough so that at the base of the throttle cable, you'll start to see some of the cable lube come out the bottom. Now before installing the throttle cable into the throttle housing, make sure to remove the housing, clean the handlebar and inner part of the throttle tube, inspect the throttle housing and pulley, make sure it is clean and clear of dirt and debris, and then lube with lithium soap-based grease or equivalent after having cleaned the housing. Now it wouldn't even hurt to apply just a little bit of cable lube to where your throttle attaches to the handlebar. Now be sure to have some clearance between the end of your handlebar and the very end of the throttle tube. If there is no clearance here, your throttle may stick. Now after you've cleaned your throttle housing and the associated parts, go ahead and get it reinstalled. Next, you can take and install your throttle cable. So for this bike, we're going to be inserting it in through the rubber cover here. And then into the throttle housing. All right, now as we thread the throttle cable into the housing, you'll notice that the thread's length exceeds the length of what's allowed to be inserted. Now, we don't want to set the threads to come past where it's allowed, or else it will interfere with the pulley that sits in this location. So be sure to stop threading in your throttle cable before it reaches the spot where it can make contact with the pulley. So at this point, we'll set the lock nut. Next, we can place the throttle housing's pulley into the housing. Now you'll notice that this is indexed, so on the top here it states that this is the upper side, the top side, so make sure you put that in the right way. So now that we've got that inside of there, we can lever it out just slightly, loop the throttle cable around it, and then we can attach it to the throttle tube. All right, now once you've got your cable installed with the pulley, be sure to reference your service manual for the proper procedures and lubricants that it recommends that you use. Now the last thing to do is install the cover. We'll button up the top part of the throttle here, and then we'll move back down to the carburetor and get it installed on that slide. Now we can thread the bottom side of the throttle's cable onto the carburetor's cap. Once that's in place, we can reassemble the spring and attach the slide. All right, so once you get the slide reattached to the throttle's cable with the spring, we can install it into the carburetor. All right, so once you get the cap set back onto the carburetor, we're gonna rotate the carb so it's back in its upright position, and then we'll secure the clamps. All right, so now we're back up here at the top side of the bike, and we're gonna check for throttle free play. So what that free play is we want some movement in the throttle tube without it actually operating the throttle. So you wanna check this with the handlebars full clocked to the right and full clocked to the left. You wanna make sure that you have about 3 to 5 millimeters of free play. Then the next thing you wanna check for is you have smooth operation at full clock right and that the throttle snaps back to the closed position. Check this full clock right and full clock left. Also, double check your throttle cable's routing. Make sure that it's routed correctly. If you have any doubts, be sure to reference your service manual for that specific information. Now, if you have any questions or concerns as to what we've done here today, feel free to leave a comment below and we'll be sure to get back to you. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more product spotlights, how-tos, and tests. All right, guys, that's it for me. I'm Dustin with Rocky Mountain. Thanks for watching and keep turning those wrenches.